Hi, how you doing? Happy New Year. I hope you've had a good holiday season and that you're managing to stay well. As is so often the case with these videos, I was browsing through an old book when I came across something I thought you might be interested in too. As you probably know, I'm now permanently in the position of dealing with a long-term injury to my leg, which has caused all sorts of issues with training. So when I came across this wonderful bit of medical advice, I couldn't help but share it. So this is from the second edition of The In-Play, or Cornish Hug Wrestler by Sir Thomas Parkins, published in 1727. I'll apologise now in case I stumble over any of the language. It's quite old-fashioned, and the printing is is not the clearest. There's a lot of long S's in there that look a bit like F's. I'm sure you've come across this, but yeah, this is kind of what it looks like. And well, we'll see. Let's just give it a go, shall we? So he's been talking a little bit about why it is that if you're going to wrestle, you shouldn't do it in high heels. You should do it in flat-heeled or low-heeled shoes, which feels almost like it probably doesn't need saying. But, maybe in 1727 it really did need saying. So let's just go over to Sir Tom and see what he has to say for himself. In all sorts of sprains and wrenches of the joints and tendons, says Sir John Floyer. Probably worth bearing in mind that this is almost him doing what I'm doing here. He's talking about somebody else's system and then critiquing it. So, bear with me. The present application of cold water, or verjuice and water, or verjuice alone, are the best remedies yet known. No doubt, but whoever begins his apparatus with clapping the foot into a pail of cold spring water, according to his cold baths, may conclude there are no stronger repercussives than it, and that the coldness of the water contracts the too much extended ligaments and prevents any afflux of blood and humours falling on the part, whilst heat promotes suppuration. But if the strain or distortion be very violent, insomuch that it is accompanied by an extravasation of blood and humours through the whole foot and leg, or in either of them, I advise to bleed 3 or 4 times to prevent a mortification, yet lest everyone should not rely on his hypothesis, I shall here insert some proper methods and applications. Which sounds a bit like a burn to me. It's worth bearing in mind that in the early 1700s, the state of medicine in Britain was not great, if we're being perfectly honest. There was still this widespread belief in the 4 humours, and bleeding was a very common thing. Interestingly, it's kind of come back into fashion for certain things now. There are certain conditions, certain injuries where the use of leeches is carried out, or sometimes more sterile forms of bleeding. But it's not quite as bizarre as it seemed a few years ago. But anyway, let's get back to Parkins. Where are we? Ah yes, I shall here insert some proper methods and applications. I myself have abated the pains and swellings by strokes and sprains, having mixed oil of turpentine and beer of equal parts, and well rubbing the grieved part therewith. Does that feel like a waste of good beer? Some advise to take a pickled herring, beaten in a mortar to a cataplasm, and apply it to the strained part. Really? Other eminent surgeons at first, for a recent sprain, make use of a little defensive made with the whites of eggs, oil rosat. Rosat? It's not a word I know. And powdered alum, which they spread on the bit of linen, A, as in figure 10, for the first 2 days, covering it with the bolster, B, and the bandage, C, drawn in a little tight. On the 3rd day, they prepare an aromatic and astringent wine, with thick wine, roses, wormwood, rosemary, pomegranate rinds, alum, and common salt. With this wine, very hot, they foment the foot, and lay on it a bolster dipped in the same, and over that a bandage, which I would have drawn tighter than the former. The application of the bolster and bandage contribute as much to the cure of the strain as the remedies. Therefore, it ought to be methodically applied. The bolster is to be 4 doubles about 4 fingers, breadth... See, this is what I mean about stumbling over the language. The bolster is to be 4 fingers... The bolster is to be 4 doubles about 4 fingers breadth, broad. This is so difficult to read. Maybe it's just me. The bolster is to be 4 doubles about 4 fingers breadth broad and about half an L long. Half an L? I don't know what an L is. You are to fix its middle on the sole of the foot, and the 2 ends come to cross on the instep, and each of them ending with a circumvolution which takes in the ankles. The band is to be the breadth of 2 fingers and 2 L's long. You must place the first end opposite to the strain. Having passed under the feet, you may mount it up again and keep it in a straight posture. You must continue these circumvolutions, which all cross the instep and end by a circular one above the ankles. And if neatly performed, it is to represent a spiker or ear of corn on the foot. This is quite interesting because a spiker is a term that's still used in orthopaedics, in trauma care, and kind of fixation. I don't know if you know this, but I used to work in trauma and orthopaedics, and I specialised in fracture immobilisation. I worked for the British Orthopaedic Association teaching plaster casting and immobilisation, and a spiker's still a thing that's used. So it's really interesting to see it described here. Yeah, just a bit of an aside. There's more. When you have made use of this wine for 10 or 12 days, you must lay on the astringent cerecloth D, extended on a bit of leather, and over that fix on the plain band E, shorter and narrower than the first, with which you must make the same circumvolutions, the least end of which you sew, in order to leave it on till the patient finds his foot has no further occasion for a band. Which time does not always come so soon as you wish, for when a strain has been great, you sometimes feel it whole years, and though you tread never so little on an inclining ground, you'll find your foot disposed to yield that way which has before been turned. Wherefore you are carefully to look where you set your foot, till it has recovered its former strength. Use low-heeled shoes, and you'll seldom, if ever, have occasion to make use of any of these prescriptions through wrestling. Yeah, he's got a bit of a thing for shoes, and that kind of makes sense. If people are wrestling in relatively high heels, which he seems to think they are, then that would be a bit crazy. So, what do you think? Is it sensible? I mean, some of what he says seems very sensible to me. I know there's very much a move within soft tissue injuries now to kind of maximise movement as much as possible, because immobilising joints does tend to lead to muscle wastage and long-term issues. But this idea that you can sprain your ankle and suffer from it for a long time afterwards is very common, and a lot of people struggle with that today. So yeah, tell me what you think, and it's been great to see you. Happy New Year again, and I'll see you soon.